3 weeks before our wedding. My fiancée handed back her ring and told me she was in love with my younger brother. My parents sat across from me in their living room and said they hoped I could find it in my heart to be happy for them. Then my father mailed me a letter from the family's corporate lawyer, formally removing me from the Coulter Holdings Partnership Trust. And 6 months later, 6 months after they handed me that envelope, like they were doing me a favor, they were banging on my door at 6:30 in the morning. My mother crying so hard she could barely stand. I'll back up. My name is Emmett, I'm 34. I grew up in Calgary, the older of 2 boys, in a family that always had more than enough but somehow never felt like it. My father built Coulter Holdings from a mid-sized property development firm into one of the larger residential developers in southern Alberta. Nothing flashy but solid. The kind of company that had its name on the side of apartment buildings and cul-de-sac developments in every suburb east of Deerfoot. I'd worked there since I was 25. Started in site coordination, worked my way up to project manager. It wasn't glamorous, but I was good at it, and I believed in what we were building. I thought I believed in the family running it too. I met Layla at a charity auction for the mustard seed 3 years before any of this. She was there with a group from the nonprofit she worked for, Housing Advocacy, which I found genuinely interesting, given what I did for work. We talked for almost 2 hours about urban density and the cost of living, and whether Calgary would ever fix its inner-city transit problem. She was sharp and funny, and she didn't take any of my nonsense when I made some offhand remark about rezoning. I liked her immediately. We dated for 8 months before I knew she was it for me. She had this way of making a problem feel solvable, whatever it was. She didn't catastrophize. She'd just look at something and say, all right, what do we actually know? And what do we do with that? I needed that. We got engaged at a cabin near Nordegg. I'd rented it for a long weekend, told her it was just a getaway. Dropped to one knee on the dock the second morning, with her coffee still in her hand. She laughed, said yes, and spilled the coffee on both of us. It was perfect. We booked a venue outside Canmore for the following summer. Small, maybe 80 guests, ceremony on the terrace facing the mountains. Deposits down on the caterer, the photographer, the florist. She had a spreadsheet that would have made a project manager weep. She was meticulous. I loved that about her. My younger brother had been in Montreal the whole time we were together. He'd done his MBA at McGill and stayed on for a couple of years working with a private equity firm there. He and I got along fine growing up, though there'd always been that particular dynamic, where my parents tracked his academic career, the way some people track hockey scores. Every milestone was an announcement. I was just the one holding things together at the office. My father introduced me at industry events as the one keeping the lights on. He meant it as a compliment. It didn't always land like one. My brother moved back to Calgary about 5 months before the wedding. My parents were over the moon. There was a dinner, bottles of wine I'd never heard of, a long speech from my father about legacy and the next generation. My brother was going to join the family business. Great. I was glad to have the help. At first, watching him and Layla talk felt completely normal. He was charming, she was friendly. They'd both spent time in Montreal, so they had that overlap. But it started to shift in small ways. She'd mentioned something my brother had said about a neighborhood she was researching for work. Then it was that he'd forwarded her some article about housing policy. Then it was that they'd run into each other at a coffee place on 17th and ended up talking for an hour. I filed it under background noise. I trusted them both. Then one Tuesday in March, Layla called me at lunch. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard before. Too level, like she was working to keep it that way. She asked if I could meet her at the Tim Hortons on 14th, the one near her office. Same place we'd gone on our third date. I knew before I got there. Not the specifics, but the shape of it. She was already sitting at a corner table when I walked in. She didn't have a drink, she had her hands folded on the table and she was looking at the wall, not the door. When I sat down she looked at me like she was bracing for something. I can't marry you, Emmett. That's how she started. No warm-up. I sat with that for a second. I asked if it was cold feet, if it was about the venue deposit she'd been stressing over. She shook her head slowly. I have feelings for your brother. Serious feelings. I'm sorry, I know how this sounds. I think I nodded. I don't really remember. There's a particular sensation that happens when something knocks the whole structure of your thinking sideways. It's not exactly pain, not at first. It's more like watching a building's lights go out floor by floor. I asked how long. She said it had grown gradually. I asked if anything had happened. She said no. I wanted to believe her and also didn't care whether I believed her. Because the answer didn't change what was sitting between us on that table. She took off the ring, slid it toward me across the table, stood up and said she was sorry, that she hadn't meant for any of this, and she left before I'd figured out what I was going to say. I drove to my parents' place that evening. My mother already knew. I could tell from the look she gave me when she opened the door. Not shock, not grief. Something closer to discomfort. We sat in the kitchen. My father came in from the study, poured himself a glass of water, leaned against the counter. They took turns saying things like, "These things happen, feelings can't always be controlled. At least you found out now rather than after." I stared at my father. "You're going to tell me this is okay?" He said it wasn't about okay or not okay. He said my brother was still his son, and Layla was going to be part of the family one way or another. And the best thing I could do for everyone, including myself, was to find a way through. My mother said gently, "They're actually very well matched." I left. 2 weeks later my brother texted me. Not an apology exactly, more of a statement. He said he knew it was a terrible situation and that he hadn't intended it. But he couldn't pretend he didn't feel what he felt. Then he asked, as if he were asking to borrow a Stanley thermos, whether I'd mind if they looked into the Canmore venue. Since the deposits were already paid. Since they'd have to rebook anyway. I didn't respond. My parents called the following Saturday. The mood on the phone was different. Warmer, almost performative. They announced that my brother and Layla were officially together. My mother said she thought the whole thing was going to work out beautifully. I hung up. I stayed off social media for a week and then made the mistake of checking it. My aunt had posted a photo of the four of them. My parents, my brother Layla, at some restaurant downtown, everyone grinning. The caption was something about family growing. I turned my phone off and left it in a drawer for 3 days. It was a mutual friend who told me my brother had proposed to Layla. They were getting married. At the Canmore venue. In June, the venue I'd booked, paid the deposit on, spent 2 weekends researching with Layla's spreadsheet open on my laptop. My parents showed up at my apartment the following Sunday morning. No call ahead. My father in his weekend clothes, my mother with a container of Nanaimo bars she'd made. As if that were going to smooth things over. I let them in because I was too surprised not to. My father sat at my kitchen table and told me the family needed me at the wedding. Not as a guest, as my brother's witness. I asked him to repeat that. He did. He wants you standing beside him, Emmett. It would mean a great deal. And frankly, if his own brother isn't at the wedding, people are going to ask questions. That's not something we need hanging over a happy occasion. There it was, not my feelings. Not what I'd lost, what other people might think. "You want me to stand up there," I said, "while he marries the woman I was going to marry. In the venue I booked. 3 months after she broke up with me to be with him." My mother jumped in. "We know it's difficult." "Do you? Because you seem pretty relaxed about it." My father's voice went the way it does when he's run out of patience. Measured, a bit colder. "We're asking you to be the bigger person. To demonstrate that you're capable of putting family first, even when it's hard." "I've been putting family first since I was 25 years old." I said. "I've been showing up to that office, managing those projects. Doing the work that doesn't get announced at dinner. And the one time I asked to be treated like a member of this family. Actually, treated like one. You're sitting in my kitchen asking me to smile for pictures at my ex-fiancée's wedding." My mother's eyes went wet. My father set his jaw. "If you can't support your brother," he said, "then maybe you need to reconsider your place in this family. And in the business." I told them to leave. Both of them. I held the door open until they filed out. Then I sat on my kitchen floor for a while, doing absolutely nothing. I didn't go to the wedding. I found out later they'd used the Canmore venue. They posted photos, the mountains behind them, the terrace where Layla and I had stood, and talked about which direction to face during the ceremony. My father gave a toast. My mother cried happy tears. Not one person from my family called to check on me. I found out through a former colleague that my father had apparently made some calls about me. Nothing dramatic, just a few conversations with people adjacent to projects I was working on as a freelance coordinator, characterizing me as going through some things, implying I might be unreliable. I lost 2 contract bids that fall, that I should have won clean. When I confronted him about it, he didn't deny it. He said he was worried about me. That word, worried, used to dress up what was actually sabotage. I told him what I actually thought of that. He told me very calmly that my anger was making it impossible for me to see clearly. A month later, a courier arrived at my door, with an envelope from Coulter Holdings' legal team. Inside was a formal notice that my partnership interest in the family trust had been dissolved. My shares, in the business I'd spent 9 years building alongside my father, gone. The document was 2 pages. Very clean, very professional. Both my parents had signed it. I read it twice. Then I put it in a file folder, poured myself a drink, and sat by the window for a long time. I called my best friend Gus, who'd been through 2 of my family's dinners, and always said afterward that he needed a palate cleanser. He came over with takeout from the Thai place on Kensington Road. And we didn't talk about any of it for an hour. Then we did. Gus said something that stayed with me. He said, "The document's doing you a favor. It's making official what's been true for years." I hated that he was right. Months passed. I rebuilt the freelance work, started sleeping better, got my mornings back, running along the Bow River before the city woke up, watching the light come over the eastern suburbs. I took a short-term contract with a municipal housing project, put my head down and did the work. One evening in November my phone started going. Then it didn't stop. I'd been in the shower. I came out to over 40 missed calls, split between my mother, my father and my brother, 11 text messages, 2 voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. I made coffees, down. Thought for a minute. Then I called my mother back. She picked up on the first ring. She was crying. The kind that shakes the breath out of you between sentences. "Emmett, oh thank God, something has happened, we need you." I asked her what happened. She said, "Someone went to the media about the Millrise project." I knew about Millrise. My father had developed a mid-rise residential building in southwest Calgary about 8 years prior, before I'd joined the company. There'd been a dispute with a family who'd purchased a unit that turned out to have moisture problems. Serious ones, the kind that took 3 years to fully surface. I'd heard fragments over the years, always framed as a difficult situation that got resolved. I never pressed on it. I'd been young and busy, and I trusted my father had handled things properly. I drove over. They were all there. My father, my mother, my brother. The living room looked like the last 10 minutes of a bad Monopoly game. My father had his laptop open, some website pulled up. My mother kept smoothing her skirt, over and over, the same motion, over and over. My father told me a reporter had contacted him about a piece running the following morning, about the Millrise building, about a family, the Yildiz family, who had purchased a unit in 2016, discovered extensive mold contamination in 2018, hired a lawyer, and then found themselves up against a wall of documentation delays, missed deadlines, and witnesses who couldn't seem to remember anything useful. The father had died in 2020, never saw resolution. His wife had spent the better part of 4 years in a legal battle that drained everything they had. My father said he thought someone from his old legal team had leaked documents. He said he was going to fight it. He looked at me the same way he'd looked at me across every major decision in my life, like I was a resource he was deciding whether to deploy. "We need to know if you've spoken to anyone," my father said. "A journalist, a source, anyone." I stared at him. "You think I did this? You have reason to be angry." "I've been rebuilding my career for 6 months," I said. "I didn't know most of what you just told me." My brother, who'd been standing near the window, said quietly, "I might know who it was." We all looked at him. He had gone pale in a particular way, the color of someone who's realized too late that the thing they're standing on isn't solid. After the wedding, he said, "Leila wanted to understand the business. She said she wanted to be part of it, to understand what we'd built, so He stopped, swallowed. I told her about Millrise. I thought she'd see it the way I did. A complicated situation, a difficult call made under pressure. I thought she'd understand. My mother made a sound. She asked a lot of questions, my brother said. She asked where the original engineering reports were archived. She asked about the Yildiz family specifically. She said she'd come across a similar case in her housing advocacy work. I thought she was just curious. His voice went very small. I thought she was proud of me for knowing the details. My father set his laptop down very slowly. Then my brother's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He looked at the screen, and something changed in his face all at once. He put it on speaker and set it down. Layla's voice came through the phone like she'd been waiting for exactly this. My brother asked if she'd spoken to a journalist. His voice cracked on the last word. There was a pause. Then she said simply yes. My mother gasped. My brother sat down like someone had pulled a chair out from under him. My father said her name. Said she had no idea what she'd done. Said she'd destroyed everything they'd worked for. Layla said very calmly, "I know exactly what I've done." Then she told them about her father. His name was Koray Yildiz. He'd bought a unit in the Millrise building in 2016 with his wife and their daughter. His daughter, who was 19 at the time, and had just started at the University of Calgary. They'd saved for that purchase for over a decade. It was their first owned home in Canada after 20 years of renting. 2 years later, the ceiling of the master bedroom started showing discoloration. Then the walls. Testing came back positive for black mold. They hired a contractor, hired a lawyer, filed complaints with the Real Estate Council of Alberta. And then documentation started disappearing. Deadlines got missed. The engineering firm's original reports became somehow unavailable. Witnesses to key conversations developed convenient memory gaps. The Yildiz family lost the legal battle in 2020. They lost the unit. They lost the savings they'd spent on the fight. Corey Yildiz was diagnosed with a respiratory illness that the mold specialist said was consistent with long-term exposure. He died 14 months later. His wife spent 2 more years trying to refile complaints. Nothing came of any of it. Layla said. I graduated and went to work in housing advocacy. And I started thinking about what it would actually take to surface what happened to my family. My brother's voice had dropped to almost nothing. You used me. She didn't say yes or no to that. She said, Emmett didn't have access to the Millrise project files. He joined the company after that building was completed. But you did. You knew where everything was archived. You were never in love with me, my brother said. A pause. Then I'm not going to answer that. The call ended. No one in that room moved for a long moment. My father's face had cycled through about 4 different things in 60 seconds. What settled on it at the end was something I recognized from every industry meeting I'd sat through with him, the look of someone who knows the other side. Has the stronger position and is calculating what damage control looks like from here. My mother was on the couch, with her hand pressed over her mouth. My brother stared at his phone on the coffee table like it had bit him. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair where I'd draped it. Emmett. My father's voice caught a register I hadn't heard before. You need to help us manage this. You understand the project timelines, you know the contractors involved, you can speak to the sequence of decisions. No, I said. I really can't. You're still our son. You dissolved my interest in this company in September, I said. Your lawyer's name is on the paperwork. I have it filed. I walked to the door. Wait, my brother stood up. Just wait. I looked at him. He looked the way you'd expect someone to look when they realize the person they built their life around, 3 steps ahead of them the entire time. I didn't have anything to say to him. Worth the time it would take to say it. I left. The story ran the next morning in the Herald, and was picked up nationally by afternoon. It was thorough. The documentation was organized, sourced, and airtight. Time-stamped emails, internal memos, an audio recording from a 2018 meeting, where the moisture issue had been clearly flagged, and the decision had been made not to disclose it to prospective purchasers. The kind of thing you'd file in provincial court, and walk out with a favorable ruling. My father's firm spent the next several months in front of the Real Estate Council of Alberta and the civil lawsuit. The Yildiz family's new legal team filed within a week of the article. Running 2 development partners cut ties. The company's credit line got reviewed. His name, which had been on the side of buildings across the city for 30 years, became something people mentioned carefully. My brother called me once, about a month after the story broke. He said Layla had moved out while he was at the office. She'd taken what was hers. He said, I keep thinking about how she never once asks about you, after everything happened. Like you weren't a complication for her. Like she'd already accounted for you. I said, I think she had. He didn't say anything. I'm sorry for what her father went through. I said, that family deserved better. But I'm not the person you call about this anymore, Fraser. You're going to have to find someone else for that. I used his name. It was the last time. My mother called twice. I answered once. She said she was seeing someone, a therapist, and that she was trying to understand how things had gotten so far from what she'd intended. I said I hoped it helped. I meant that, actually. I just couldn't be part of whatever came next for them. I kept working. Got a full-time project coordinator role with a housing nonprofit that spring. The kind of work Leela and I had talked about the night we met at that auction, which wasn't lost on me. I poured a lot of hours into it. It felt like work that mattered in a way I couldn't always say about Coulter Holdings. I met Odette at a friend's housewarming in Inglewood. She was an urban planner who made fun of a particularly bad parking lot design in the neighborhood before I'd even learned her name. She was funny in a way that was specific. Her jokes were about actual things, not just mood. She liked hiking the Rockies, had strong opinions about sourdough, and didn't seem to be performing any version of herself that I could detect. A few months in, we were sitting off my couch on a Sunday evening, and she asked me, very directly, the way she does everything, whether I missed my family. I took my time with it. I said I missed what I thought they were, not what they turned out to be. There's a version of my father I believed in. Fair, principled, the man who gave speeches at industry dinners about doing things the right way. And I spent 9 years trying to earn that man's approval. But he wasn't quite real. He was the story the family told itself. The actual man buried engineering reports and cut his son out of a business trust because the son wouldn't perform at his brother's wedding. That's not a family, Odette said. That's a set of terms you never agreed to. I nodded. That was enough. Here's what I've made peace with, or tried to. Layla moved through my life like I was a problem to be solved. That's not nothing, that lands. But the thing she was working toward. Accountability for what happened to her father, for what my father did to her family's savings, and her family's health and her father's last year of theirs. That was real. And it deserved to come out. I can hold both truths at once. It took me a while to get there. Now I'm there. I don't need to forgive her to get there. I don't. Saints to Stangry either. The ring is in a box in my closet. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. Some days I think I'll sell it, put the money towards something useful. Some days I leave it there and don't think about it at all. What I didn't expect. What I genuinely couldn't have predicted when I was sitting on my kitchen floor, after my parents filed out that Sunday morning, is how much lighter things feel now. No more dinners where I performed a version of myself, designed to fit neatly beside my father's legacy. No more being introduced as the one keeping the lights on. No more measuring my worth against my brother's trajectory. The family I have now is the one I built. Gus, who showed up with takeout and didn't try to fix anything. A coworker named Preet, who drags me out to trivia nights when I've been in my own head too long. Odette, who tells me the truth in plain sentences and doesn't need me to be anything other than what I actually am. That's the kind of family worth keeping. And the one I grew up in. I hope they find their way to something honest. I mean that. But that's their work to do, not mine. I stopped looking for their approval sometime around last spring. I remember the exact morning. Standing on the riverbank before the city woke up, watching the ice break up on the bow, the water starting to move again, after months of being locked solid. That's exactly what it felt like. Like something finally, properly moving.